The new monarchs of England, France, and Spain marshaled their resources, curbed the nobility, and built strong centralized regimes in order to develop new sources of finance. To do this, they increased taxes and increased fines and fees for royal services. They also increased the size of the state and added to its responsibilities. Rulers in England and the Netherlands shared authority with representative institutions and created centralized states. Whereas monarchs in France, Spain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia concentrated power in their own hands and created a form of state known as absolute monarchy. In England and the Netherlands, two different forms of constitutional states formed. In England, a constitutional monarchy was observed, and in the Netherlands, a republic based on representative government. The absolute monarchs based their power on a divine right theory, similar to that of the Chinese mandate of heaven. Non-compliance to the king was considered blasphemy and was punished severely. An example of an absolute monarchy is King Louis XIV. The Age of Enlightenment began during the 17th century and had its most influence during the 18th century. It was a very important time period which focused on the intellectual, scientific, and cultural things within the world. For example, Enlightenment thinkers sought to discover natural laws that governed human society. Their search took place in several different forms. Hence, the English philosopher John Locke worked to document natural laws of politics and develop theories such as the social contract theory. The Scottish philosopher Adam Smith turned his attention to economic affairs such as capitalism and the laws that govern them. And French nobleman Charles Louis II sought to establish a science of politics and discover principles that would promote liberty and success. In addition, a prominent group of intellectuals, collectively known as philosophies, addressed the public with their thoughts on life and society's issues. A well-known philosophy was François-Marie Arouet, also recognized as Voltaire. He promoted individual freedom and challenged oppressive institutions. Additionally, new ideals such as deism arrived. Deism is the belief in Christian teachings but the denial of any supernatural things among the religion of Christianity. Furthermore, the theory of progress promoted the belief that as humans became more independent and used their own thinking, society would be more successful. The ideas of the Enlightenment contributed greatly to the start of revolutions in North America, France, and Latin America in many ways. For instance, French philosophies such as Voltaire, which promoted individual freedom and attacked oppressive and unjust institutions, empowered less eminent classes of people to think for themselves. This in turn made people realize that they were not as privileged as the unfair higher classes. In effect, rebellions broke out due to spite and anger against the more privileged in hope of legal equality. The Declaration of Independence drew inspiration from Enlightenment political thought in justifying the America's quest for independence. The French revolutionaries also drew inspiration from Enlightenment thought, yet the French Revolution was a more radical affair than America. Napoleon Bonaparte was a brilliant military leader. He brought political stability to a land torn by revolution and war. The Concordat Pact was an agreement with the Pope and brought peace with the Roman Catholic Church. This won Napoleon a great deal of support from people who supported the revolution. Napoleon approved the Enlightenment ideal of equality, but he was no champion of intellectual freedom. Toussaint Louverture also drew inspiration from the Enlightenment. He particularly admired the writings of the French philosophers, who spoke of individual rights and equality. The Enlightenment ideals of freedom and equality correlated with the revolution in the Atlantic Ocean basin. During the 18th century, the idea of rebellion and individualism sparked a feeling of freedom inside the slaves of various countries. In North America, revolution led to things such as political independence and a broad array of individual freedoms. In France, it demolished the hierarchical society of the ancient regime and extended political and legal rights to all citizens for a temporary span of time. Overall, the North Atlantic and European subcontinents experienced a time of universal freedom due to the revolution. However, the first country to finally come up with the idea to abolish slavery was Haiti. During the Haitian Revolution, many soldiers who enlisted in the armed forces were indentured slaves. Toussaint Louverture, the military leader of the Haitian Revolution, had previously been a slave and even became a personal slave owner after he was granted his freedom. However, when the revolution succeeded, the slaves were given the right to freedom, which would later lead to a campaign to end slavery for good. Beginning in the 18th century, the movement to abolish slavery finally began around the world. People such as European Christian moralists voiced oppositions to slavery. Early freed slaves, such as Olaudah Equiano, were also slavery critics in the early part of the century. However, as stated earlier, the anti-slavery movement didn't really begin to gain momentum until after the French, American, and the Haitian revolutions. The leading spokesman for the movement was William Wilberforce, an English philanthropist. He attacked the idea of slavery on both moral and religious grounds for endless reasons. He attracted many supporters after the Haitian Revolution and finally passed a bill to end the commerce of slaves. The bill took up in many countries, beginning with the United States in 1808, France in 1814, and the Netherlands in 1817, and finally Spain in 1845. The dominant English Navy would patrol the African coast to make sure people were complying with the law. However, the actual abolition of slavery was much more difficult to obtain because owners had property rights on their slaves. Many planters and merchants tried to resist as much as possible, hoping to not lose a life of abundant supplies and inexpensive labor. Nevertheless, abolition of slavery doomed the institution of slavery in the Americas. In much of South America, slavery ended with the region's independence from Spanish rule. Simón Bolívar was a key figure in the freedom of these slaves, combining forces to help free future slaves.